This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo.
Hello and welcome to the latest Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo. I'm Matt Addison with Paul Gorst, David Lynch and Theo Squires alongside me. We'll take a look back at the Champions League win over RB Leipzig shortly and look ahead to the Wolves game on Monday night. I've got a feeling it might be a slightly more positive and upbeat podcast than has been the case on a few occasions over the last few weeks. But Gorsty, I'll come to you first, and there's only really one place to start. Fabinho was back in midfield for the first time since October the 17th. And Liverpool suddenly looked a lot better.
They did, and I don't think that's any slight on Fabinho in defence, because I actually think it's probably been one of Liverpool's best performers this season whenever he's played. But almost instantly, probably inside the first 10 or 15 minutes, you noticed how much of a different proposition Liverpool looked with him in midfield. And it wasn't just what he brought to the team in terms of closing the spaces, getting his blocks and his tackles in and his interceptions. He's also got a bit of an underrated passing range as well, but I just felt that he allowed Thiago Alcantara to play his normal game and Gino Wijnaldum to play his natural game, and it just helped Liverpool no end in there, and especially with an inexperienced back line of Kabak and Nat Phillips. For me, they just got to continue on now. Klopp has to just kind of accept that they're not a perfect, defensive partnership. The young, they're inexperienced. Neither of them, you would say, at elite level, but neither have really put a foot wrong this season. So I'd continue on with them for as long as possible until the inevitable centre-back injury strikes again for one of them. But Liverpool just looks such a different team with a proper midfield, two genuine bona fide centre-backs in there, and for all the kind of criticism and debate and downtrodden kind of atmosphere that we've given to this podcast over the last few weeks, Liverpool still had 8 Champions League winners in that team on Wednesday night, and just looked so much. It was just a breath of fresh air, wasn't it? Just having Fabinho back in there, Mane and Salah getting on the score sheet, and I just think that everything good about Liverpool came from having Fabinho restored to that defensive midfield position. And Klopp said that after the game, that he's the best in the world in that position. So it seems it would be a strange move to take someone out of there going forward. So for me, he's got to carry on, as have Kabak and Phillips, and let's just see where Liverpool end up.
It was a huge sort of difference that it made, wasn't it, David? I know you weren't massively impressed, and neither was I, to be honest, with RB Leipzig. Do you think, to an extent, possibly the sort of difference was down to the fact that Leipzig played into Liverpool's hands a little bit, or do you think it was more the case that Fabinho moving there just gave Liverpool a lot better balance?
I think you can say that Fabinho was a massive influence on that fact, because you look back to the first leg, and I think Liverpool probably a little bit fortunate to come away with a 2-0 win that night. They were probably better than a lot of the games around that period, but the 2 goals come from mistakes, whereas this one, it was just a case of Liverpool were relentless. They created chance after chance, completely in control of the game, and came away from this one with the same scoreline, but having fully deserved it and a much better performance. So although I wasn't impressed with Leipzig in either leg, I think the fact that Liverpool's performance was a level above this time said a lot about what Fabinho brings to midfield, and Gorsty touched on it there about what he did to Thiago as well, in terms of his performance. It wasn't just a case of him being let off the leash and being allowed to do all these creative things. It almost gave him a freedom to sort of be on the front foot and press and win the ball. I think when he came off the pitch, he'd won more tackles than any other Liverpool player, more recoveries, and so those sort of statistics point to the fact that he was doing things that were impressive on both sides of the ball, and his stats just sort of back up what we saw, which was a very good performance. And just having Fabinho there is so helpful, not just to Thiago as well. I think just to the team as a whole. I think his ability in tight spaces with the ball is massive in that position, because that's exactly where teams like Leipzig want to press and put you under pressure. And he's just so calm. He either drops a shoulder and works his way out, or he picks out a nice little pass through gaps. He's so intelligent in that way. And I think back to the goal that Liverpool conceded against Everton at Anfield early doors, and the first couple of minutes of the game there, the ball's pinballing around in Liverpool's midfield. They can't get a grip of it in front of the defence. They lose it right there in front of the back four, and then a free pass is on in behind. That sort of thing just doesn't happen with Fabinho. He's either more composed in possession than the Liverpool players showed in that moment, or once the ball breaks, he cuts it out and recycles possession. So I just think, I agree. They're just a massively better team with him in the number 6 position. And I think, although Klopp wouldn't have probably seen it as an ideal solution, is using the 2 younger lads at the back. I think it's something he's going to have to think about, because if you've got someone who's the best in the world in their position, like he said, then I think you've got to use him there.
Yeah, Theo, we'll come on to the 2 centre-backs and what you made of their performances shortly. But do you think there might be a temptation for certain games, maybe later on in the Champions League, to put Fabinho back in defence? Or do you think there's that level of trust there on the evidence of this game that Liverpool should just keep him there now just for the rest of this season?
It's where Liverpool obviously look a lot better with him in midfield. And one of the issues this season is they've had so many players out of their preferred positions. And it's been a regular trend under Jurgen Klopp that he's got a number of players that are versatile and can play outside of their favourite positions. You think of James Milner at fullback, or Gini Wijnaldum, Jordan Henderson as a number 6. And then it's when you put them back in their preferred positions, you think, wow, that's how good they really are. And whilst Liverpool have been able to get away with it in the past when it's only one player, be it Milner at left back or when Wijnaldum or Anderson deeper, when they've had to make a few changes to compensate for the loss of Van Dijk, it has added up on the whole impact on the team. So it's one where, granted, Fabinho is probably the better centre-back than Kabak and Phillips, but he's the best holding midfielder in the world, and he's going to offer more protection for them there, give them more stability, considering it's been a very unstable season for Liverpool. It's one where maybe you might put him in as a centre-back if you've got a comfortable home lead or something, you just want to see out a tie later on, or depending on away goals, and it comes down to the tactics there. But Liverpool should probably stick with tried and trusted. Now, it is what he is good at. They've just got so much faith and ability. When you've got Fabinho behind you in that number 6 role, you know both fullbacks can bomb forward and they're fine. They're not going to get caught out the same way. The same security you have from Virgil van Dijk at centre-back. They're just that much better at covering ground and seeing out the danger. So it's one where if he's at centre-back, granted, he might be the best option they've got there, but he is so much better in midfield, and it's probably a better balanced team there, and it covers for the lesser quality at centre-back.
I would actually say as well on that point that it'd be an interesting debate when Jordan Henderson is fit again, and if he is fit again before the end of the season. That gives Jurgen Klopp a really difficult decision to make, I think, of the 2, which ones he maybe moves back there, or if he doesn't and he just goes for full strength in midfield.
I suppose that is crucial, isn't it, David, having those options further forward. Maybe earlier on in the season you would have had to have put one of them back there, but you know the fact that they've got a couple of options, Naby Keita for the time being at least is fit, you've still got James Milner, you've got 1 or 2 others, you do have that option to do that at this moment in time.
Well, that's it. I think that's what maybe will make him lean towards putting one of them back there. Whether it is maybe Henderson might end up being his preferred one to move back, just because Fabinho's been so solid and has such an obvious effect on the team in the number 6 position, that when Henderson comes back, and hopefully, like I say, it'll be before the end of the season, he's the one who drops back. And then, like you say, you've still got so many options there in that midfield, and Thiago, Wijnaldum, Keita, Milner. So, I think one of them is going to end up going back there, even though we've said all this. But, it's a tough call when that comes around.
Gorst, you mentioned it before, the impact on Thiago and how much better he looked with Fabinho alongside him. And we've said it plenty of times with Virgil van Dijk, over his time at Liverpool. He's one of those players that's just so good that whoever's next to him is improved as well. And I think we saw that with Fabinho as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think you've got to start looking at Fabinho's importance to this team in the same kind of frame that you look at Van Dijk and Alisson. Since his arrival has also coincided with Liverpool kind of charging towards the Champions League and then the Premier League. I mean, we know that Van Dijk and Alisson kind of take much of the plaudits for that, but Fabinho's no less important as he cost a little bit less, but he's still, what is he, just below Naby Keita as the 4th most expensive Liverpool signing of all time. So this is a player who the club were willing to put a massive investment towards and really get behind as a key figure in place for 5 years when he signed in the summer of 2018. And so far he's really proven himself to be worth it. As Klopp said, he's the best number 6 in the world, isn't he, after the game? And for me, it's a bit of a simple one. I mean, we can analyse, to look how it's come on, but as Klopp says, Fabinho's the best number 6 in the world. So if you've got someone who is, as Lynch says, the best player in that position, it's foolish to play him anywhere else. So for me, he's just got to continue on in that position now, and whatever else, all the other dominoes that fall around him, so be it. You know, if Liverpool have issues at centre back, they've got Ben Davies there who's yet to make his Liverpool debut. They've obviously brought him in for a reason. So you know, I'd be resistant as much as I could towards moving Fabinho out of that position, because we saw it on Wednesday night. Liverpool just looked so much different and so much more like the Liverpool that we've become accustomed to over the last few years.
Can we stop calling it the number 6 role? Can we just call it the Fabinho role? But you think we've all grown up with that position's the Claude Makelele position, and that you think of the great Real Madrid teams. And Zinedine Zidane said he was the best player in that team. He was the reason they had the Galacticos and it all glued together, and they fell apart and they sold him to Chelsea. Mourinho's Chelsea were brilliant with Makelele there. You had Kante a bit later with Leicester and Chelsea. Fabinho's got that impact on Liverpool. Let's just call it the Fabinho role. He's the best holding midfielder. Let's give him the credit he deserves. Let's name the position after him.
Yeah, certainly. Why not? Let's call it that going forward. A little bit behind the Fabinho role, and let's talk about the two centre-backs there. What did you make of their performance, and did you think they were solid enough to give you some hope going forward?
It was old-school defensive play, but it did the job. You think Leipzig had 2 target men, didn't they? Was it the big Poulsen lad, wasn't it? And today the lad from Palace, Soroth as well, he played, didn't he?
He came on at half-time, yeah.
Yeah, it was always going to be more playing into their hands when you've got those physical presence, especially for Nat Phillips, because you know he will just win anything in the air and head anything. And they're probably, as a pairing, better suited to these European games because the teams aren't defending the same way. Games are more open, and there is a bit more physicality in there. The way they're not getting in the Premier League this season. In the Premier League, we've seen them struggle a bit against pace. Nat Phillips, he was probably his best performance we've seen from him so far. And Ozan Kabak, he was much improved from what we've seen before. But then his 2 best performances for Liverpool so far probably come against Leipzig in the Champions League games. So you just want him to build on that in the Premier League. But then we said that after the away leg in Budapest as well. They are just better suited to European football. Hopefully getting these game times, getting this partnership going, keeping with them, it can give them that confidence and that belief. And with Fabinho giving them the added protection, you'd like to see it become a bit more secure in Premier League football.
We've spoken a lot about injuries and the impact of those on this Liverpool team. And I think that's pretty obvious, David, over the last few months. But does this game sort of show that once you get 1 or 2 of those pieces back, Liverpool can get right back up to those levels? Because even without Van Dijk and without 1 or 2 others, they just looked a lot more like themselves with only really Fabinho back in his normal position.
Well, yeah, that's it, isn't it? It's not just the injuries; it's the injuries on injuries on injuries. And it seems to be every week that Liverpool were picking up a new one, and a new player that you've come to rely on in a certain position was falling by the wayside, and someone else was having to come in cold to replace them. So it's no wonder the form has dropped off so dramatically, and they haven't been quite as good this season. And I think, like you say, if they can just get any modicum of consistency between now and the end of the season, maybe Fabinho playing to because we forget, we don't mention him in terms of the injuries, but he's had a couple this season now, the muscular injuries, keep him in the number 6 till the end of the season. Can you keep Nat Phillips and Ozan Kabak together until Henderson, like we said earlier, maybe comes back and gives him a decision to make? Can you keep the rest of the team as it is and as consistent as possible? Obviously, the only areas really Klopp likes to sort of mix and change things up consistently is probably in midfield. So if you can just find that in some sense going forward and not be coming up with, another small, even if it's a short-term injury and not picking up one of those every other week, then that would be a massive, massive help for Liverpool. And like you say, they've got a couple of players have come back to fitness now, so it gives them more options and the ability to just change things off the bench and give people, even if it's just half an hour at the end of the game, to sort of ease their legs in this busy schedule. So hopefully that can bring a degree of consistency to the team, and that'll be reflected in the results.
And in terms of the wider impact of the result, Gorsty, I think part of it for me, the big thing is the confidence that Liverpool should take from it, getting themselves into the next round. But the other thing that's probably just as big is that we've now got something to look forward to for the rest of this season. You can look ahead to the draw a week today. You can look ahead to a Champions League quarter-final. It just gives everyone a big lift. And as I say, there's something now to look forward to on that horizon. Yeah,
it keeps the season alive, doesn't it? Because let's face it, Liverpool are looking up at 8th now, and with Chelsea 7 points clear, is it, in 4th, and West Ham, Everton, Tottenham also above them, it's looking increasingly likely that they're going to be in the Champions League unless they're in it as holders. Something which I wouldn't completely rule out, but it's tough, isn't it? I mean, even if Liverpool had everyone fit, it's still a difficult task to do. Go and win the Champions League. It's not as easier said than done. But as I say, it just keeps Liverpool's season rolling on. Something to look forward to, as you say, and I also think that it's Liverpool's away form. You know, whether you consider that one the home leg, it's still away from Anfield, isn't it? And their away form actually has been decent of late. Apart from the Leicester game, I think they've won 5 of the last 6 during games that haven't been in Anfield. And for all the criticism that has deservedly come their way for their form at Anfield, they've actually been really good on the road. So with the next couple of games coming up against Wolves and then Arsenal, hopefully if they can continue this kind of run and form and performances, then we'll be seeing something a bit more resembling the Liverpool that we know by the time that they host Aston Villa on the 10th of April, which will be close to 4 months since they last won at Anfield, which is incredible, really. So it's something Klopp said a couple of times in his press conferences is that Liverpool haven't had the momentum this season, and he's right to an extent because it's always been about kind of who's the latest player to go down injured, what kind of square peg are we going to have to stick in the round hole this week, and if they can carry on this kind of performance against Wolves on Monday and then carry that on, then maybe after the international break they can have a really good tilt at the final 7 or 8 games of the season and just see where they land.
In terms of momentum, Theo, I mean, obviously there is an international break coming up. I think it's around 19 days between Liverpool matches. Has that almost come at the wrong time, potentially, if they can continue this form into Wolves? Or would you take it the other way and maybe just say it's a bit of time on the training ground for a few players to have a little bit of a rest?
Probably can argue it both ways. We've seen Liverpool have long breaks before between games this season, which is quite a strange feeling, and they haven't turned it on when they've got back to action, but then they've not been able to play into form either when they've been playing games every 3 days. They have still got a number of players that are just coming back from injury, or like Roberto Firmino's missed a couple of games. So the break probably would do them the world of good to get these players up, get them all up to speed. Like we've not seen much of Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain this season. So it's like all of them can just get on the training ground and work together. Jurgen Klopp can find this best system for him, whether that's with Kabak and Phillips at centre-back, Fabinho in front of them, and get the best out of the full-backs. But then if they do go and beat Wolves off the back of 2 wins, you just want that next game to come. That will be that feeling of getting it out the way to try and get the momentum to show that the real Liverpool are back. But then Klopp can use that hunger to feed the players that they've had such a poor winter. They've been pretty poor for 2.5, 3 months now. It's only in glimpses we've seen the best of them. And they've just been wanting to turn it on. When they can play tired minds and tired legs and have this rest, but go into it with a win, wanting to get back on the playing field, it should give them that bit of life, that bit of energy just to keep it up, you'd like to think.
Yeah, it should be a confidence boost, David, for the whole Liverpool team. But I think Sadio Mane, just before we move on from the Champions League, is one that I wanted to pick out. He's one that maybe has not had the easiest year so far in 2021, but he did miss a couple of chances in the first half, but then does get his goal and seemed to have a big grin across his face when that one went in.
Yeah, we've said it before on this podcast, haven't we, that his poor form this season sort of gone under the radar with a lot of the focus sort of being on Firmino really this season, and he hasn't been quite up there, whether that's just been, playing too frequently, too much sort of pressure on his shoulders with all the injuries, and as Liverpool sort of asking the front three to sort of bail them out on a weekly basis because there's been so many injuries and destabilising other areas of the pitch apart from that front three have sort of escaped that, thankfully. So, I'm not really sure why it isn't it, and I didn't think he played well in the second leg against Leipzig, to be honest, up until his goal. But you just hope, and it can happen to forwards, can't it, that they just get a goal and that changes their outlook. And like you said, he looked absolutely made up to have scored, and hopefully that can be the start of a little run for him towards the end of the season. I think having Jota back will be a big help. You can miss the odd game now, and you can sort of switch up that front three a little bit, and that'll be helpful. And not just switching it up, but switching it up and not losing any sort of degree of quality. Jota is a top player. He's worthy of being part of that front three, whoever else is alongside him. So hopefully that can do Mane a favour, and we can see him go on a little run of goals towards the end of the season, because he's probably due that. It's not been a great season by his standards.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure the Wolves game on Monday, probably one that he's got his eye on for another goal, just to keep that momentum going. And Gorsty, we will talk a little bit about Wolves now, just to sort of preview that game. It's going to be a different challenge, isn't it, to the Leipzig game? Wolves are probably going to sit in and try and counter-attack, and it's kind of the system that Liverpool have struggled with so far.
It has, and that's why I was so surprised by Leipzig's approach. Obviously, Julian Nagelsmann's got this reputation as one of the kind of emerging coaches of European football, but he mustn't have seen too many Liverpool games of late, otherwise he would have literally have done what you suggested there and just stick 10 and 11 men behind the ball and wait for their opportunity to inevitably arise, because that is the blueprint to success against Liverpool, and certainly has been since West Brom got the 1-1 draw at the end of December. Yeah, I expect Wolves to do something similar, and with the likes of Neto and Traore in particular, they've got players who can counter Liverpool on the break. And okay, Traore hasn't had a vintage season, but I still think he's a very good player and someone who, if you give space, he can absolutely devastate the team. So with him and Neto on either wing, they will be a little bit of a deterrent for the likes of Alexander-Arnold and Robertson to push forward as often as they like. But I think Wolves have really missed Raul Jimenez, haven't they, since he got that horrendous injury was against Arsenal. From what I've heard from Nuno, it does sound as though it's positive on that score, and he will hopefully play again this season, which is great news. But he's going to be absent for this one, and Wolves have really struggled for a bit of a killer instinct up front in his absence. They've got the young lad, haven't they? I always get confused with some of the Wolves players.
I think.
Yeah, they've got a few like generic Portuguese sounding players.
In January, William Jose.
Yes, not William Jose. It's the first one I mentioned. But I think if Liverpool are looking to kind of really emerge out of a sticky patch, which Wednesday's performance would suggest that they're willing to do and capable of doing, then I think they've got to go to Molineux and pick up 3 points.
Yeah, absolutely. We've spoken about the defensive troubles there. I think since Raul Jimenez has been out for Wolves, they've played 18 Premier League matches and only scored 17 goals. So in terms of those two centre-backs and Fabinho in the Fabinho role, it's probably not a bad game in that sense to try that once more.
No, it's not. But then this season is when we've had teams out of form that they seem to turn it on against Liverpool, where the keeper's had a blinder and the strikers that haven't been able to score have managed to get on the score sheet. It's certainly going to be a huge test for them because you just know if we'll sit deep and hit them on the counter-attack. Adama Traore up against Phillips and Kabak could end horribly if they're not careful, if they don't have that added protection for Fabinho. But Liverpool, they've got that confidence now and they've got that consistency. The partnership have had a few games there. You'd like to think it can be a turning point for them. Like, it's a game where you're a bit uneasy about what could happen. Wolves have got so much pace on the counter-attack. They've got a couple of good midfielders in Neves and Moutinho who can pick a pass. Obviously, we know they're going to have men behind the ball because they tend to have the three centre-backs. And it's just something that Liverpool can use as a turning point. We've seen them in both games against Leipzig. They've got the victories. But Champions League football is different to how teams are using this blueprint in the Premier League. And it needs to be this turning point for Liverpool to overcome their mental troubles and show that with Fabinho back in this role and Salah and Mane on the score sheet again, that they have turned a corner.
I think that's it, isn't it, David? It's an opportunity to say that this wasn't just one game against Leipzig. This is another team, another slightly different system. Okay, they've got one or two quick players, Pedro Neto and Adama Traore being those two. But if Liverpool can get a result here, it would really sort of cement that idea that they genuinely have turned the corner. Because, as Theo said earlier, you know, Liverpool did beat Leipzig earlier in the season and they didn't seem to turn the corner then. This has to be the one now that they actually do that.
Yeah, and typically these games against Wolves, and obviously the one earlier this season wasn't the case. It was a really good performance of Liverpool and a comfortable win. But typically they've been quite close, haven't they? And I think this one at Molineux, you always get a test there. It's always, even, you know, no matter what form Wolves are in, they've got a very set way of playing, and they know how they're going to go about the game. So they'll make things difficult for Liverpool. They always have, even when Liverpool were in their absolute pomp in recent years. So it's it would be a massive statement for Liverpool to get the win. Just in terms of, like you say, we have definitely turned a corner. This can be the start of a nice little run towards the end of the season, and you know that might still not end up in top four, but I think, you know, it would still, you know, just to get some wins under the belt and put all that horrendous run behind them just feels like a really important sort of story towards the end of this season. I don't think you could just keep continually losing Premier League games and then, you know, suddenly over the summer everything changes and you start winning straight off the bat. I just don't really think that's how players and momentum and confidence really works at this level. So. I think it's a big test. It's a different test, like you say. I think Raul Jimenez is not just a miss because of his goal threat, but it's just his ability to get the ball up the pitch for Wolves and hold up play, and that's the wingers they've got and the pace there. They do miss that focal point to play off. So that hopefully that will make things slightly easier for Liverpool. I think with the decision around Fabinho in centre halves and Nat Phillips, I think maybe they've got that pace there. But I do think with Nat Phillips, we've seen in other games that he can cope with pace. I think. The main aim is to stop those passes going through, isn't it? And that's where Fabinho in that holding role or in the Fabinho role, Theo, could be so important.
Trademarking that.
Yeah, and Nat Phillips, we've seen he came on at half time against Tottenham, and Son didn't really have a sniff. I think he can keep pacey forwards quiet if he has that help in front of him in midfield. So a big test of Liverpool, but I think one that if they can pass, they'll feel they can just go on a nice little run there.
We've spoken a lot, Gorsty, about the impact of Fabinho, but I wanted to talk a little bit about Roberto Firmino as well, and Diogo Jota, obviously going back to his former club for the first time since he signed for Liverpool. Do you think the impact of Liverpool's increase has partly been down to Jota coming back into the team as well? Because I thought he was really, really good against Leipzig.
Yeah, it wouldn't have hurt, would it? I think we've spoken at length about Firmino's struggles this season, 6 goals, which normally you would be able to overlook. And I think it was certainly overlooked last season when Liverpool were absolutely flying. But this time around, when they're going through, a really sticky patch, and then you look at the other things that he's not quite bringing to the table that he normally would, then you have to admit that it is a bit of a growing concern. So I think there's players the likes of Thomas Souček and Neil Maupay and Michail Antonio, they've all scored more than Firmino, which for Liverpool number 9, even for the other things that you bring into the pitch, probably isn't good enough, is it? So I think Jota's return might just be a little bit of a kick up the backside for Firmino, and he'll have been watching on Wednesday night on May's side with a trademark smile, no doubt, as Liverpool moved into the quarterfinals. But I think maybe in the back of his head there would have been that little alarm bell that suggested that he's not going to get back in this team immediately, and he does have a bit of a fight on his hands to regain his place, because if Jota was still out injured, you'd expect Firmino to walk back in ahead of Divock Origi, say, or even if the system was tweaked and Ajay and Shaqiri. But with Jota, he's just had such a positive impact all season, really. So I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that Liverpool's number 9 instantly gets back into the team, and that can only be a good thing for Liverpool. I think when you think of Firmino having something to prove when his chance comes again, and Jota looking to kind of keep him out the side and stay in the side himself. So I think both players having something to play for will be beneficial for the next 2 or 3 months.
I suppose, Theo, it's about having that option off the bench as well. I'm not sure whether Roberto Firmino will be back for Monday night's game just yet, but if he is, would you play him or would you keep him on the bench?
Firmino or Jota? Firmino.
Firmino, sorry, yes. Yeah.
I'd probably leave him on the bench just because Jota, he's got that added spice against his former club. I don't think he started against them at Anfield when there had been the expectation for him to. He's missed a lot of football. Like, even when he was back from injuries, when he got ill, you want him to get some game times in his legs and get back on the scoring sheet. So it's not just Mohamed Salah offering goals on a weekly basis. And Liverpool have looked deadlier with him in the season. I think whilst it wasn't a vintage of performance in the first half, they did create a lot of chances that just went begging that you'd expect them to score. Maybe it can give them a bit of a boost. With defences being a lot deeper this season, maybe we're not seeing the best of Firmino because they're not following him as much, and it's just leaving bodies in the penalty area, so there's not as much space for Salah and Mane. But when you've got Jota leading the line rather than coming deeper and they're all moving over the place, it is harder to track, and you're hoping that can give Firmino this little bit of spice to get back into the form of things. But when Liverpool have struggled with the tried and trusted this year, Jota offers that something a little bit different.
And just before we move on to team selections then, David, I just wanted to touch a little bit on Liverpool being clinical. That was something that was a bit of an issue in the first half against Leipzig. They got a couple more chances and it was fine in the end, but you'd like them to score a few of those against a Wolves team, which probably isn't going to offer as much space in behind as Leipzig did. Yeah,
they can't be affording to sort of waste those opportunities regularly. I think that the upside is that in recent weeks, in a lot of the games, particularly at Anfield, They haven't been creating opportunities at all. They haven't really sort of disorganised teams or looked threatening at all. So I thought it was, even though those misses, you would have liked them to have bagged a couple more. At the end of the day, if you can keep creating chances that regularly, and that's what we were used to throughout these past few years. Not necessarily I even think that front three, when it's on its absolute game, is maybe not even the most clinical in world football anyway. I think what Liverpool's whole idea was under Jurgen Klopp is to create as many chances as possible throughout the game, and then some of them, or enough of them, will go in. So I think that's not a major worry, but like you say, we'd maybe like to have seen him get a couple more of those chances, and maybe you might have to be a bit more clinical against Wolves, because he probably won't make things as easy for Liverpool as Leipzig did.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that in mind, Gorsty, we'll move on to our team selections, and I'll come to you first. I assume everyone's going to go for Alisson in goal, and I suppose the back four has almost talked itself up as well, obviously, with that performance midweek.
Yeah, I don't see any particular reasons to change now. As I say, I think Kabak and Phillips have got to be given the chance to establish this partnership now between now and the end of the season. And if there are a couple of bumps in the road along the way, then so be it. These are two young, inexperienced centre-backs who might not have a long-term future between them at Liverpool, but it's a sense of needs must. And to be fair, I think they've started 2 games together and kept 2 clean sheets, so fair play to them.
And Theo, would you make any changes? Is there any sort of option for someone like Ben Davies who's back fit? Is there any sort of changes you might make maybe with Kostas Tsimikas? We've seen him a couple of times off the bench. Or would you just sort of stick with the same back four and say, just go again?
Unchanged back four. Like, one of Liverpool's biggest issues this year in that defence has been the lack of consistency there. The fact that they haven't had a run of games for them to get used to each other, and it's not just the centre-backs, it's in front of the goalkeeper, and it's with the full-backs as well. Granted, Trent and Andy Robertson might have been a bit tired, having to play pretty much most weeks, but they've had enough rest after Leipzig, and they're going to have enough rest after Wolves to put in another shift, and it is about building those relationships. Granted, it's not going to be a back four we're going to see for Liverpool next season, but if it's going to be the one we're going to see for the rest of this season, you want it to be as stable as possible, and they get that from game time together.
Yeah, in total agreement here. And David, I suppose you're probably going to go with the same back four, but in terms of someone like Tsimikas, he's had obviously very limited opportunities this season. There is going to have to be a point where you do give him a bit of time on the pitch, but maybe not in this one.
Yeah, I think maybe the option for him and what Klopp will maybe look at it is maybe the next Liverpool game, before Premier League game, before a Champions League game. I think that's where he'll maybe see. I don't think there's top four. I think it's probably long gone now. Even if Liverpool get on a great run, the teams are just, there's so many teams ahead of them. It's going to be difficult to leapfrog them all. So I think, yeah, maybe when that next Champions League tie comes around, then that's when you maybe see a couple of changes. Maybe we'll even see Ben Davies at that point finally. And Tsimikas, like you say, but until then, I think just try and get some consistency, like we say, into that back four now would probably be a good thing.
And Gorsty in midfield, there's a couple of options, as we alluded to earlier. There's Naby Keita in contention. Obviously, James Milner is there. Are you going to go for a three in midfield, and which three might they be?
Yeah, to be honest, without giving it all away, which I'm going to give it all away, I would think the Liverpool team, it'd be the same 11 for me, because we know that Jurgen Klopp doesn't like when you're playing of a Wednesday night and then you're playing of a Saturday, particularly Saturday morning. But with this game coming on the Monday night, Liverpool have had the best part of a week to rest and recover and properly analyse Wolves. So I don't think he will need to make too many changes, if any. So Fabinho back in the Fabinho role, if you like, Theo, with Wijnaldum and Thiago, and that's for all the problems that Liverpool have had this season, that's still a top class midfield trio, isn't it? So if they can get the upper hand in that midfield area, then you'd expect Liverpool to overcome Wolves. And with Jordan Henderson out, that is for me Liverpool's best midfield three.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to change it up a little bit. I'm going to keep two of them the same. Thiago and Fabinho, I think, absolutely have to play. But I'm going to go with Naby Keita, give Gini Wijnaldum a rest, Theo. I think Keita, Fabinho, Thiago could be an exciting trio in the middle of the pitch.
Potentially, you want to see Keita get more game times. And if you're leaving out Curtis Jones, that's incredibly harsh considering how well he's played this season. But I'm with Gorsty, just keep it the same. That waited so long for Liverpool to put in a good performance, and it's the best Gini Wijnaldum's played in weeks. It's the best Thiago's played all season. why take them out? It's all very well saying the defence need that game time together, but when Liverpool have had so many injuries, that you want the midfield to have that relationship as well. When things have been up and down, stick with what you got. Naby Keita's time will come. Curtis Jones' time will come. But when you've had the time to recover and all this, just stick with what you've got. Liverpool need 3 points on the board. Top four is probably gone. The fact that they don't play the teams above them is a big hindrance. And it's one of those where on paper they could get a load of good results and go on a run against these teams below them. But that's who they've struggled against. They need every help they can get. And that's what you're going to get from stability and consistency from sticking with a winning team.
And even if there is the likes of Keita and Jones and Milner on the bench, David, that's a decent set of substitutes to be able to use as well. Are you going to go with the same three again or change it up a little bit?
To be honest, I'm in agreement with you, Matt. I actually think maybe Keita in for Wijnaldum might be the change. I'm not really one of those people who would like to see Wijnaldum out the team, generally speaking. And I think Keita, his signing so far been so beset by injuries, hasn't he? It's really been sort of disappointing on the whole. But I think like we say, the idea of him getting a run of fixtures would be nice, and we know he's a top player. But I just think this time it's more a case of Wijnaldum it's like an experimentation on a human being. The limits he can go to in terms of games played in a row. It's absolutely incredible what he's got through this season. I just think, let's not have him getting an injury towards the end of the season, particularly since there's hope of going slightly deeper in the Champions League. Just giving Wijnaldum a day off would feel really, really important for him. And if Naby Keita's fit and he's looked bright in those couple of cameos he's had recently, maybe give Wijnaldum the night off. I think he's absolutely earned it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we know what Gorsty and Theo's front threes are. David, are you going to go with the same as those two, or is there any sort of argument to bring Firmino back in?
Well, I think in Liverpool's play against Leipzig, there was, at times, even though Jota I thought played fantastically well, and was absolutely key to that opening goal, of course. There were moments where you sort of missed Firmino in sense of when Liverpool were playing into the final third, the ball would come back occasionally too often, just because Jota, in terms of if he's got a man on his back, is not Firmino in terms of holding the ball up. And, even though his play around the goal when he comes deep on the wing and he passes it back and he builds it from there, it's fantastic centre-forward play. I think when the man is slightly tighter behind him, he really struggles, which, most players would. I think both the other wingers are similar in that sense. So, I don't think it's perfect having those three together, but I think for this one, again, Firmino, even if he is available for it, I think you don't want to take any risks at this point, and you don't want to rush him back for anything. That's a difficult decision for further down the line. So I think for this game, maybe Jota just to keep his place in that front three, and even though it's not necessarily a perfect unit, there's so many goals in those three, isn't there? And they're really, really dangerous.
Yeah, Salah, Mane and Jota for me as well. I fancy Jota to get one against his former club, actually. Gorsty, I'll come to you first on a score prediction. I'm going to go for a 2-1 Liverpool win. What do you think it might be?
Yeah, I can see something similar, actually. I think I agree with what Lynch said earlier in the part about Liverpool taking the chances, because while it was quite refreshing to actually see them get the chances the other night, because they haven't even been getting out of late. It was still a little bit of a worry that it took them maybe 4 or 5 really good chances in before Salah stuck that one away. So I think they're going to have to be a little bit more clinical against the team who are probably going to be happier to defend. But I maybe can see possibly just nicking a 1-0.
Theo, I'll come to you next. Will Liverpool keep a clean sheet? What do you reckon?
I'm probably going to go 2-1 as well. It's just a hard one to see Liverpool getting the Premier League clean sheet. Granted, they've done it in the Champions League, but they have been harder to come by in domestic action this season, and Wolves are that threat on the counter-attack. For me, it's whoever gets the first goal. Like, if Liverpool get that first goal, you've got faith in them getting the job done. But if it's another first half without them scoring, with them missing chances, and then they fall behind, you do start to worry. But you like to think that this win's given them a bit more belief to get the job done, and with the options coming back. But yeah, a hard-fought, tight 2-1.
Yeah, and David, to finish us off, another Liverpool win, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think Wolves have sort of struggled for goals this season, haven't they? I think that's been an issue for them. I think they'll make things difficult and tight for Liverpool, but it's for them scoring goals is as much an issue, much more of an issue really than it has been for Liverpool. So I'm going to go for a 2-0 to Liverpool.
Yeah, wins all round. It's been a little while since I think all four of us have predicted a win, but fingers crossed Liverpool can get that job done. That just about brings us to the end of the podcast today, though. We'll be back, of course, with the next Blood Red show on Tuesday next week after Liverpool play on Monday night. For now, though, from myself, Matt Addison, from Paul Gorst, David Lynch and Theo Squires, until next time here on the Blood Red channel, thank you for watching and listening, and goodbye for now.
This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo.